The week my HOA tried to freeze me out of my own house, it was 15 below zero, real temperature, not wind chill. The kind of cold that hurts when you breathe and makes the snow squeak under your boots. And that was the exact morning I found a padlock on my gas valve. My name's Daniel Harper. I live outside Silver Ridge, Colorado, in a quiet mountain neighborhood where people are supposed to mind their own business. Supposed to. We've got an HOA, and like a lot of HOAs, it started out normal trash day reminders, lawn rules, that sort of thing. Then somewhere along the way, it started acting like a tiny government. That morning I woke up around 6 and knew something was wrong before I was fully awake. A heated house has a softness to it. Mine felt sharp wrong. I checked the thermostat 61. I keep it at 68 overnight. I bumped it to 72 and waited. Nothing. No rumble from the furnace, no blower, no little mechanical cough. Just silence. I went to the basement. Furnace looked fine. No error lights, breaker, good power on. I reset the system anyway. Still nothing. That's when I thought, gas. So I pulled on a coat, gloves, boots, and stepped outside into wind so cold it felt mean. Behind our houses, there's a utility corridor where several of the main gas shut-off valves sit. I walked back there through the snow, rounded the side of my house, and stopped. There was a padlock on the valve feeding my home. I stepped closer and read it. Service suspended pending HOA compliance review. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because when something is that stupid, your brain grabs whatever reaction keeps you from throwing something. Someone from the HOA had shut off my gas in the coldest week of the year. I took out my phone and photographed everything. Living around HOA people teaches you one rule fast: document first, argue later. Now, if you're wondering why they were after me, it goes back about 2 months. I keep a backup generator behind my house. In the mountains, power outages aren't rare, they're seasonal. After one bad winter outage, I built a metal enclosure around the generator to keep snow off and cut down the noise. Practical, sturdy, not exactly a palace. The HOA hated it. I got a letter saying the enclosure violated community aesthetic guidelines because the color didn't match the approved exterior palette. I called them and said I'd repaint it in spring when the weather was warm enough to actually do the job right. Seemed reasonable. Apparently not. A week later, Patricia Langford showed up at my door with Kyle Mercer from the board. Patricia was the HOA president. Kyle was her polished little sidekick. Patricia stood on my porch and said, "Mr. Harper, your generator structure remains in violation." I said, "Yeah, and I told you I'd repaint it in spring. It's winter in Colorado." Kyle jumped in. "The board expects compliance within 30 days. You want me painting metal outside in freezing weather?" Patricia gave me that tight little smile some people wear when they think politeness is the same as authority. Community standards must be maintained. That was when I realized it wasn't about paint, it was about control. So I went back inside, poured coffee, and looked at the photos again. Then something clicked. The gas line feeding my house wasn't just mine. It was part of a shared distribution branch, and the main junction crossed an easement on the back edge of my property. I remembered there being very specific language in the paperwork about interference. That was when I stopped being angry and started getting interested. My first call was to my attorney, Marcus Feldman. Marcus is the calmest man I know, which is exactly what you want in a lawyer. I said, "Marcus, tell me whether I'm crazy or whether my HOA just illegally shut off my gas in -15 weather." He went quiet for a second. Then he said, "Start from the beginning." So I did. The enclosure, the letters, Patricia and Kyle, the padlock, the tag, the temperature. He listened the whole time. When I finished, he asked one thing. "Did you touch the lock?" "Number." "Good. Send me the pictures." I texted them over. A minute later, he let out a quiet chuckle, the kind a lawyer makes when the other side has done something beautifully reckless. "Daniel," he said, "that valve is part of a regulated utility system. If the HOA put a private lock on it that could be treated as unauthorized tampering, call the gas company, then call the county utility inspector, and don't warn the HOA. The gas company got serious immediately, and the county moved fast too. About 45 minutes later, a white service truck rolled into my driveway. His name tag said Rick Alvarez. I took him to the utility corridor. Rick, crouched by the valve, read the orange tag and snorted. HOA did this, apparently. He took photos, radioed his office, checked the line, then looked at me and asked, "This branch feeds more than your house, doesn't it?" I nodded. "Clubhouse, pool heaters, maintenance shed, a few HOA buildings." He sighed. Then he cut the padlock off, bagged the tag, and reopened the valve. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. Rick straightened up and said, because somebody interfered with a shared regulated branch, we now have to inspect the entire distribution line for safety compliance. I said the entire line. That includes the HOA facilities. And right there, standing in the snow, I felt the first little spark of karma. Then a dark blue SUV came flying up the road and stopped hard near my driveway. Patricia got out first. Kyle came hurrying after her. She marched over and said, "What exactly is happening here?" Rick answered in the calmest voice imaginable, "Gas company safety inspection, ma'am." Patricia snapped, "Why are you interfering with an HOA enforcement action?" Rick blinked once. "Did you place a lock on a regulated gas shutoff valve?" She lifted her chin. "The HOA suspended service pending compliance." Rick glanced at me, then back at her. "Well, that's going to be a problem." Then he explained that because the valve was part of a shared distribution branch, gas service had to be temporarily suspended while the entire system was checked. Patricia stared at him. "You shut off the clubhouse heat," she said. "And the downstream facilities," Rick said. Kyle's face went pale. He whispered, "Oh no." Patricia turned to me. "You called them?" I lifted my coffee mug and said, "Well, somebody locked my gas off in sub-zero weather. By afternoon, the whole neighborhood knew. Neighbors were texting, people were driving past the clubhouse, and once the heat went out down there too, the story spread fast." That evening, the HOA called an emergency board meeting at the clubhouse. Homeowners were allowed to attend, so I went. The room was colder than usual, which felt poetic. People sat in coats with paper coffee cups, waiting to hear how a paint dispute had turned into a utility disaster. Patricia opened the meeting in that polished boardroom voice and called it a temporary utility maintenance concern. That was one creative way to say it. A woman near the front asked if that was why the heat wasn't working. Patricia said yes, temporarily. Another neighbor asked how this started. Patricia hesitated, then said the HOA had temporarily restricted gas access to a private property due to a compliance issue. That was my cue. I stood up and said, "Just so everyone understands, the board locked the gas valve supplying my house during a week when it was 15 below zero." The room went silent. Then Mike Dalton, a retired firefighter who lives down the road, leaned back in his chair and said, "That might be the dumbest enforcement strategy I've ever heard." And then the twist arrived. The back door opened and in walked Rick Alvarez from the gas company, still in his work jacket, holding a folder. He came to the front, handed it to Kyle, and waited while Kyle read it. Kyle's face changed immediately. Patricia asked, "What is that?" Rick answered for him. "Documentation of unauthorized tampering with regulated gas infrastructure." You could have heard a pin drop. Rick explained that the inspection was complete, service had already been restored, and the gas company strongly advised that HOA boards not interfere with utility controls they had no authority to touch. Mike muttered, "Maybe put that in the bylaws," and the room cracked up. That was it. Patricia lost the room right there. Not with some big dramatic speech, just with facts. The next morning, my house was warm again, and I had an email from the HOA board. Subject line, formal apology and service restoration notice. It said the board had acted outside proper procedure, confirmed my gas had been restored, and promised a review of enforcement policies. No mention of Patricia by name, but the tone told the whole story. Funny thing is, I never got another letter about that generator enclosure. Not one. I repainted it in spring anyway because I said I would. There's a difference between being reasonable and being controlled, and that difference matters. It was the lesson underneath it. Most abuse of power doesn't show up looking dramatic. It shows up with polite language, official stationery, and somebody so intoxicated by small authority that they stop noticing when they've crossed from enforcing rules into putting people at risk. That's the dangerous part. Not just the arrogance, but the belief that having a title means common sense no longer applies. Every now and then I still walk past that utility corridor and picture that orange tag flapping in the wind. Patricia thought she could use the cold to make me comply. Instead, she got the clubhouse shut down, the neighborhood laughing, and the board apologizing before breakfast. That's a satisfying kind of justice. But I am curious what you think. Did the HOA simply go too far, or should shutting off someone's heat in deadly weather come with real consequences beyond an apology? Where does enforcement end and abuse begin? And if you've ever had your own run-in with an HOA, a petty board, or somebody drunk on a little borrowed power, tell me your story in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who's seen small authority turn dangerous the second somebody finally pushed back.